Good morning, and welcome to the Cities Digital webinar titled How to Become a Scanning Ninja. My name is Justin Steen, and I'm one of the system architects and software trainers here at Cities Digital. Now, for those of you who have not attended a webinar with us before, I'm going to take a moment to explain some of the features available to you. If you take a look at the side of your screen, you'll see the chat window. If you have questions at any time, please enter them here. At the end of the presentation, I will go through as many questions as I can in the time allotted. Also note that you will not be able to ask questions through the phone, as all participants' microphones have been muted. If you do need me to speak louder or are having any sort of audio issues, please just type a message stating so. I'll be recording this webinar and you'll receive an email with a link to it for later viewing. So if someone at your organization was unable to attend today, they'll have the opportunity to view this webinar at a later date. I've created a handout for the webinar as well, and I'll be sending out a copy of it with a recorded webinar. I'd like to preface the start of the presentation by reviewing what this webinar is really all about. And today we'll be examining the Laserfish scanning interface, and we'll be looking at a number of tips and tricks that can make you both more efficient and consistent when it comes to scanning. Although our primary work is typically conducted within Laserfish scanning, for today's presentation, we won't only limit ourselves to the application itself, since there are a lot of features and functionalities that exist within the Laserfish client that can help you to work smarter as well. And as a general note, I would simply encourage all users, regardless of their role or the primary use of their system, to explore some of the different features of the Laserfish client, since there are all sorts of features that can make your job easier and more efficient. Finally, I'd like to thank you all in advance for taking time out of your schedule to be with us this morning, and note that at the end of my presentation, a short survey will pop up on your screen. I would ask that you please take a moment to answer the questions. Your feedback is very important to me. Having said that, let's take a look at the agenda and topics that we'll be covering today. To start off, we're going to take a look at creating shortcuts. This is a feature that you may or may not know about, and that's the ability to create shortcuts to folders and store those shortcuts outside of Laserfish. Then we'll examine the OCR process and talk a little bit about whether it really should be included in your scanning queue. We'll review some features that can allow you to operate and navigate with a bit more speed in the system, namely the use of keyboard shortcuts, which, if you aren't familiar, could really speed up the way you interact with other programs and applications that are outside of Laserfish. Moving along, we'll take a look at the advanced option features of Laserfish scanning, which may be something that you really haven't explored, but there are definitely some nice defaults that you can set that I think you will like. This may be more of an advanced setting, but if you store documents to a location that is specific to a client or a vendor, let's say, something along those lines, you can apply template field information to a parent folder and inherit that down into the document. This will save you keystrokes for information that you might have to otherwise type over and over. And finally, we'll examine some other Laserfish modules that can help you to process even faster and with more consistency. So let's get started. So did you know that you can create a shortcut to a Laserfish folder and store it outside of Laserfish? Okay, so why is this helpful to you? Well, it could be helpful if you primarily scan into one area of your repository, or if you scan into, let's say, an incoming scans folder. So by creating a shortcut to a specific folder in your repository and launching Laserfish from it, you can see an abbreviated view of your repository, only viewing the folders that you work in. And of course, you can also skip browsing through the rest of your repository in order to get to scanning folders. To create a shortcut, it's pretty simple. You'll simply select the folder that you'd like to create a shortcut to within Laserfiche. You can drag that folder onto your desktop. And as you can see in the screenshot below, on the right-hand side, I have a snapshot of a folder structure that I was using. And you can see that what I've done is I drug the accounts folder on my desktop, and that created the shortcut. Once you do that, you'll see a folder with a file extension that will read .lfe, as shown on the left-hand side. So let's give you a live demonstration on how that could work, show you how easy it is, and maybe give you a better idea of how you might use it. Alright, so I'm working within my virtual machine here, and for the majority of scenarios that I'll be talking about today, I'll be operating from the perspective of a scanning personnel that works in the accounts receivable department. And we'll say that for my particular job, I only deal in invoices, that my organization has so many invoices coming in that it's really my only job is to scan invoices over and over. So what I'm going to do is actually exit Laserfiche, and we'll enter it in the more traditional way by launching the Laserfiche client. And you can see that within my repository, I've got an accounting department, an executive departmental folder, human resources, and so on. Well, since I only work in accounting and I only work in accounts receivable, perhaps I would only want to see this folder. So what I did is I created a shortcut to that called accounts receivable. And I'm going to close this, and you'll see that now when I launch Laserfiche from that shortcut folder, it takes me right to the accounts receivable folder. I don't see anything else except the subfolders contained within it, which of course could include my invoices and so on for the different vendors that I work with. So it's kind of a neat feature that you can use to just abbreviate the way that you look at Laserfiche, save yourself the time of having to browse through all kinds of different folders to get to the folder that you intend to scan to. Alright, we'll move on to our next topic, which is all about OCR. And so here's a simple truth. Performing OCR during scanning will slow you down. There's no question about it. So I'll pose the question here, does your image processing queue look something like this in Laserfiche scanning? So this is just a screenshot that I took from inside the Laserfiche scanning interface, probably something that you're familiar with. I've got the Scanning Explorer pane, and as you can see from my image processing, I've told Laserfiche scanning that as it sees a image, I want to perform a rotate on it, which is just to make sure that the text is correctly oriented so that all of my pages are in the right direction. I'm going to run a despeckle on it because maybe my scan quality is kind of poor. Maybe I've got little dots all over, so I'm going to run that despeckle. And then finally, I've chosen to run an omni-page OCR. Okay, so that will make my document text searchable. So what's the benefit of setting things up this way? Well, the main thing is that I'm making sure that everything that comes through my system has been OCR'd, right? And because it's all been OCR'd, that means it's text searchable. It means that when I store this document into Laserfiche, it is immediately text searchable. Now, depending on your organization and your throughput procedures and your needs, that may be of great benefit. For other organizations, it may be that you don't really use the full text search immediately. Maybe it's used a week after the fact. Maybe it's used months after the fact or years and so on. Now that we've talked about the benefit, what's the downside? So to talk a little bit about the downside, I actually conducted a test using a Canon DR4010C scanner to see exactly how significant an impact including OCR has when scanning. So this was a neat little test for me to be able to quantify why I'm saying OCR slows things down. So let's take a look at the results. Well, I scanned in black and white simplex, pretty simple, and with OCR included in my processing, I got 23 pages per minute from my 4010C scanner. That's a 40 page per minute scanner, so not real great. When I took OCR out, I got 40 pages per minute. Okay, so that's a pretty drastic change. So what does this equate to? Let's put this in terms of what this may mean to a scanning individual's week and their month. So let's say I have a scanner who scans an average of 8,000 pages per day. To some people in on the call, that may be an extremely high number. To others on the call, that might be a low number. So just keep in mind that scanning 8,000 pages per day is a realistic volume for a number of clients that I work with. So per week, math's pretty simple, right? Equates out to about 40,000 pages per week. And if we take that and turn it into the month, that's 160,000 pages. So let's look at this from an hourly perspective, what it would take to scan 160,000 pages per month at the different rates that I just talked about a moment ago. So monthly volume at 23 pages per minute is going to take me 116 hours. So that's over 3 weeks of our time almost in a month. Monthly volume at 40 pages per minute, around 67 hours. It's a little over a week and a half time. So 3 weeks versus a week and a half, essentially. It's a pretty big difference. So you might be saying, okay, I get the point. OCR slows things down, but I want my information to be OCR'd because I use the full text all the time. So when should I OCR? Which is a very good question. So let's talk about some alternatives to OCRing at the time of scanning. One of the things you can do is use a search within the Laserfiche client, and that search is called the Has Pages search. And what it allows you to do is to round up all the documents that have not been OCR'd in your repository. As you can see in the screenshot, I've selected the button that says Contain OCR Text on No Pages. By hitting Search, this would find everything in my repository that hasn't been OCR'd. I could select all those documents and OCR those in bulk. I could then take a break, go to lunch, let it run overnight, or do anything else but sit there and wait for something to OCR. Now, if I was just concerned about making sure that my information is OCR'd because I'm a scanning personnel, well, I could add another criteria to the search and say, I want to find everything that hasn't been OCR'd, but the user is, let's say, Justin Steen, okay? And that would find everything that I've scanned into the system that hasn't been OCR'd and would allow me to finish my work. Another alternative, and this is a little bit of a sales plug, but it's a neat program. Cities Digital has an auto OCR program. What it allows you to do is run the search that I just showed you a moment ago, but it's carried out from your server. It's run as a scheduled task. So it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. You can have this OCR process run, OCR everything, and it's just consistently doing that. I think if we look at those previous statistics, there aren't a whole lot of scenarios where that cost isn't justified. Benefits include making sure that everything is OCR'd. Okay, if you're running this as a scheduled task and you're having a computer do this work, you will know that it's being done. You can keep scanning efficient, so you can make sure to take this out of the hands of scanning personnel. And of course, you can run that OCR during off-peak hours. So you could run this as a scheduled task at night when bandwidth isn't an issue. All right, we'll move on to our next agenda topic, which is talking about saving clicks and keystrokes. So there are many built-in features within Laserfiche, within the scanning module, that when you add them together can have significant impacts on how quickly you process your documents. So in this section, we're going to look at default properties within Laserfiche scanning. And we're also going to look at how you can customize your keyboard. So earlier I mentioned that we'd talk about keyboard shortcuts, and that's what this is pertaining to. So let's look at default properties, and what you're seeing on the left-hand side of the screen is a screenshot within the Laserfiche scanning interface, and this would typically be what you'd see on the right-hand side, but these are my default properties, okay? So these are configuration options that I can set up so that scanning always carries out a number of the same steps. So one of the things I can do is set a default document name. By default, I believe Laserfiche scanning calls this untitled, okay? Typically, though, you would rename this something else, and if you want to take it a step further, you can actually use tokens as a way to use the fields that you populate, your template fields. You can use those to generate the name, and I'll show you how to do that in a little bit, which can significantly save you time and keystrokes. You can also set default template use. So if I work in the accounts receivable and I'm always working with the invoice template, in fact that's the only template I ever use, well, I'm going to go ahead and set that as my default template to use when I'm in scanning. That way I don't have to select that every time that I scan a document in or every time that I create a new document. It's just going to default to invoice. And finally, I can set default fields. Okay, so if you look at the fields that compose this template, I've got vendor name, client ID, date, invoice number, and invoice amount. Let's say that I batch process my invoices by vendor, meaning that if I work with a company called ABC Lumber, I might have a stack of 50 invoices that I'm going to scan all at once for them. Well, we know that some of these items are always going to be the same, and when I say items I mean these fields. So my vendor name and my client ID are always going to be the same value for that particular scan job, right? So what I'd want to do is just set the vendor name to ABC Lumber and set the client ID to the appropriate client ID for that vendor. And I don't have to fill that in every time. One of the other features I really like within default properties is the limit pages per document. And this is a great feature because if the documents you're about to scan are all, in this case, let's say 3 pages long, you can tell Laserfish Scanning to create a new document after every third page that it scans. Now this is operating in a more ideal world where everything's a fixed number of pages, right, which isn't always the case, but I bet there are instances where certain types of documents are all 1 page long or 3 pages long or 4 pages long. You can save yourself some time by setting this up on an as-needed basis. The next item I'd like to focus on is customizing your keyboard to utilize shortcut keys to execute an action in Laserfish Scanning. So in case you're not familiar with what a shortcut key is, it's usually a combination of keys that you hold down to execute an action. A pretty universal example of this is holding down Control plus the P button to initiate a print job. So if you have Microsoft Word open right now and you select Control P, it's going to bring up your print window where you could select what printer you'd like to print to and actually execute that print job. So that's what I'm talking about now, is not always using your mouse as a way to indicate what you'd like to do. If you've got your keys on your hands on your keyboard, you should be able to use some of these shortcut keys as a way to very quickly execute actions within Laserfish Scanning. So Laserfish does come preloaded with a number of pre-configured keyboard shortcuts. And to access those, we can go into Laserfish Scanning, and from the File menu, we're going to select Customize Keyboard. You can see in the screenshot there, I went to File, and then I'll select Customize Keyboard, which is near the bottom. Once you've done this, you'll see the Shortcut Keys window pop up. And from here, you can browse through the different categories of shortcut keys. You can view what's already been configured, and then you can also set up custom keys. So as I said, Laserfish does come preloaded with a few of these. In the screenshot, I've selected the Create Document action, and Laserfish comes preloaded so that if you hold down Control and then N, it will create a new document from whatever page you have selected. So that's just one example of it. Let's go into a live demonstration, and I want to show you very quickly how to use those default properties that I talked about just a few minutes ago, and then also take a little bit closer look at these keyboard shortcuts. So what I'm going to do is launch Laserfish Scanning. Bear with me for just a moment. I'm running this all on my virtual machine, and I'm sure it's efforting. Alright, now that Laserfish Scanning has loaded, you'll see that I've got my default set up to include my invoice template. But let's say that my document naming convention just uses the invoice number plus the invoice amount. So what I can do is I can tell Laserfish Scanning to name the document based on whatever value I type in invoice number, And actually, I'm not going to use invoice amount. Why don't I use date? That's probably a better field to use. So invoice number plus date. So it's automatically going to name it that way. Now let's take this one step further and we'll say that everything I'm about to scan is for ABC Lumber. Okay? And because it's for ABC Lumber, I know that the client ID is 123456 for them, let's say. All right. As previously stated, I can get to my keyboard shortcuts by going to File, Customize Keyboard. And you can see now I'm to my Shortcuts key window. And from here are all the different types of categories I can look at. So if I go to Action, you'll see that there are shortcuts for creating a document. There are shortcuts for splitting the document already created. Store All I've set up as Control-Alt-S. So when I hold down that combination, it's going to store everything in the Laserfiche for me. And so there are obviously a number of different actions that you can carry out through the use of keyboard shortcuts. What I'd like to do now is just show you how I can use some of those. And so this is a little bit of a magic trick, I suppose. So just keep your eye on the cursor and note that I'm not going to go up here and select Start Scanning. I'm just going to use my keyboard shortcuts. So I'm going to hold down Control-S, which initiated the scanning process. And you can see there that it actually scanned in my document. Now it's loading my pages. So it's scanned in 7 pages. And now let's say that I want to go to page 3 and I want to split that document. So what I can do is actually hold down Alt, and then I'll use my arrow keys to page through these different pages. And now that I'm on page 3, I'm going to split that document by holding down Control plus D. Okay, so you see how easy that was. I just went through, split it out without even moving my cursor. So you can imagine that if you get really good at using these, you can just fly through the Laserfiche scanning interface, which is really kind of my inspiration for the kind of the goofy webinar title, being a scanning ninja, but it's a general idea is to just operate very quickly within these interfaces. Now let's say that the second document I created should actually be moved to a new folder. So I set up a hotkey using Control F that will automatically take that document and put it in a new folder. From here, I will have to click, unfortunately, and tell it where I'd like to store it. But I could tell it that I want to actually store this to a different folder, let's say. We'll say I'm moving this to Barry's Mending. And then finally, I'll go ahead and fill out my template information and carry out the rest of my actions. So that's really the idea behind using these shortcut keys and operating a little bit quicker. The next item I'd like to take a look at within Laserfiche scanning are the advanced options that it comes with. So you can set up some additional defaults and options within Laserfiche scanning as well, or in addition to what I just showed you. To access these options, you'll go to File and you'll select Options, which is shown below. You'll see that once you select Options, the Options window will pop open, and there are a lot of different defaults you can set up. I'd like to jump back into my virtual machine to show you some of those very quickly. So if I go to File, Options, you'll see that there are some defaults that I can set up. If I go to my General node, there is one item that I do like here. It's the Store Documents Immediately After They Are Processed. This is I suppose kind of a dangerous default. If you accidentally selected it, you'd be sending your documents automatically unknowingly, but let's say that your job is to simply scan. You don't do any indexing, meaning you don't key in any of the information of the fields. Maybe that's someone else's job within the organization. If it was your job just to scan and scan and scan, you could tell it to store documents immediately after their process, which is kind of neat because you wouldn't have to hit the Store button every time that you want to store into Laserfiche. Another option I like is this when navigating to a document option. You can see that you can set it to go and select the document name, or you can also tell it to select the current field. So in my scenario where I'm having Laserfiche scanning automatically populate my document name based on whatever I input for these fields, I wouldn't want to have it select the document name, right? I'd probably want it to go to the current field. So just to show you what that looks like, when I click on this document now, you can see it takes me right to the field that I haven't populated yet. Okay, so that's a nice feature that I know when I've conducted training, after the fact, after people have been using Laserfiche, they've loved that they don't have to click out of here and now go to the next template. You can keep your hands close to your keyboard and keep working faster and faster, hopefully. We'll have to move on to our next topic here. We are running a little short on time. We're going to take a look at inheriting field information. So another neat thing that you can do within Laserfiche is inherit field information down from a parent folder. Now the disclaimer to this is that this is not always applicable for every organization. But if you scan documents into specific client folders or maybe a vendor folder as an example, it could be a feature that saves you time. So let's use my scenario again that I work in accounts receivable and I just scan invoices all day long for my organization. So we're going to assume the following folder structure and template. On the left-hand side, I've got the accounts receivable folder, and you can see that under accounts receivable I have an invoices folder, and within the invoices folder I have it separated out by the different vendors that I work with. Now on the right-hand side you see my invoice template, which I know you've seen a couple times now. I've got vendor name, client ID, date, invoice number, and invoice amount. Since all of my ABC Lumber invoices will be scanned into the ABC Lumber folder, and presuming that the vendor name and client ID fields will contain the same values for all of those invoices, this is really a perfect opportunity to inherit field information from the parent folder. So if I batch all my ABC Lumber invoices together and I scan them into that folder, what I can do is inherit the information that I applied to that folder above down into my documents. Now that's kind of a mouthful, so it's probably easier just to show you what that looks like. On the back end, more for an administrative piece, anybody that is an admin and on the call today, you'll use the %parent token in the admin console as the default value for fields that you would like to populate using this method that I've just described. So let me show you the end result of this, and that may make a little bit more sense. So I'm going to go ahead and close scanning and we'll delete out what I just scanned in for just a moment. And what I've done here is if you right click and go to the fields of this folder, and that's right, you can apply fields and templates to folders as well, not only documents. I've applied the appropriate client ID and vendor name to every single one of these folders. And now I'm going to inherit that information into any document that is scanned into that folder. So if I go to this folder and launch scanning now, I'll be scanning into the ABC Lumber folder. I'm going to tell it to name the document based on whatever I type in invoice number plus the date. So you'll finally get to see this feature in action as well. We'll go ahead and hit start scanning. Now I don't need to select my vendor name and client ID because those are automatically going to be populated. So the only thing I'll do is fill in my date, my invoice number, and my invoice amount. So we'll say this is for $43. Now I'm going to store this into Laserfiche. And you can see there's my document. And if I go to Fields, it automatically inherited the information from the parent folder. So again, I didn't have to key this, it automatically did it for me. So that could be applicable to a number of people in on the call today. Kind of a neat feature. Alright, finally, we're on the last topic, and that will deal with scanning blindfolded. And scanning blindfolded is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, as you might guess, but what I'm talking about here are components like Laserfiche Workflow and Quick Fields, and the fact that they can completely change the way that you process your information. They can alleviate the need to have scanning personnel name documents, populate templates, file your documents, and so on. In some cases, with clients that I've worked with, I've been able to achieve unattended processing. Now, you need the right Laserfiche product configuration for this, but it's definitely possible in certain scenarios. So let me show you what this could look like. It might be a sneak peek into Quick Fields or Workflow for people that haven't seen it. So we're going to jump back to my virtual machine here, and what I'm going to do is launch Laserfiche quick fields. And what I've done is I've set up a very basic quick field session that is actually going to extract information off of the image for my sample invoices. It's going to use that extracted information to automatically populate template fields and then store the documents into Laserfiche, where I've got a workflow that's automatically going to file them for me and rename the documents. So some pretty neat stuff going on here. So here's my sample invoice. And what I've done is I've told Quick Fields to read this section of the document and to grab this information and automatically fill it in to my template fields that I'm using. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Start Scanning. And it's going to automatically break out all my invoices into their own documents. The neat thing being that it automatically filled in information for who the vendor was, what the date is, and what that total invoice amount is. You can see that changes as I go down, and it matches up exactly. All the way down. I'm just going to store these all into one folder location, which is my automated incoming scans folder. So they're all going to one folder, but if all goes as planned, by the time I get back to that folder, they won't even be there, and they will have been moved to their appropriate folder within my folder structure via workflow. So we'll jump back into the Laserfiche client. Probably should have used my shortcut there, but go to Accounts Receivable. We'll go to my Invoices vendor folder, and again, it's worked exactly as designed. It scanned those documents and placed them in their appropriate folder. So a little bit quicker, a little bit easier than traditional scanning. A neat feature and something that you may want to look into for your organization. That's it for the webinar today. Again, thank you for popping in for this half an hour to take a little bit closer look at some of the ways that you can scan a little bit more efficiently. I do see that we've run out of time, so any questions that you may have, please feel free to send me an email, justin@citiesdigital.com, and I'm happy to follow up with you. Again, there will be a short survey that pops up at the end of the presentation. If you could fill that out, I'd really appreciate it. Thanks and have a great rest of your day. Bye.